'Twas the week after Christmas, and as the kids rummaged through the refrigerator in the house, they were all complaining yet again. There's not yet a... Relatives just didn't seem to know when to say goodbye. The stockings lie limp by the mantle on the floor. Once they were full, but not anymore. The wads of paper and bows that are strewn underneath the Christmas tree are now a grim reminder to all of us parents that those presents from Santa weren't really all that free. We have decorated, we have celebrated, we have purchased gifts, we have wrapped gifts, we have given gifts, we've opened gifts, we've regifted gifts, we've returned gifts. We have gone to program after program. We have heard the same 10 Christmas songs on the radio over and over since November. We have welcomed people that we were just looking forward to. We have depleted our energy, and we have emptied our bank accounts. And here we are. We have ended the most wonderful time of the year. We're coming to the end of Christmas. We're coming to the end of a month. We're coming to the end of a year. We're coming to the end of a decade. You know, we like to talk about beginnings a lot more than endings, don't we? Beginnings are exciting. Unlimited potential in the future. Everything is hopeful. It's fun. It's exciting. Full of optimism. It's not so fun to talk about endings sometimes, though, is it? They're not quite as exciting. We've been through some bumps along the way in its raw reality. However, since our endings actually catapult us to our new beginnings, we not only have to know how to begin well, but we also must learn how to end well. This morning, we're going to take a few minutes to explore a few of the endings that we will encounter as we go on our life's journey. If you look on the back of your messenger, I've written out a little outline. I've wasted your time today if I haven't given you something that you can take out of here and use in your everyday life. And so mainly to keep you awake and engaged, you can turn that over, and there's a pen in front of you. You can fill in some of the blanks there. And I promise not to skip any blanks, because some of you would not sleep for the rest of the week if you went home with a blank that wasn't filled in. Some endings that we face in our life, they're final. There's a period at the end of the sentence. Do it, it's final. Divorce, death, the end of a friendship, the loss of hope. When we face final endings, we have to grieve final endings. Write that in your blank. We grieve final endings. You know, King David knew about final endings, didn't he? Even though he was a man after God's own heart, one day he was up on the top of the roof of his house when he should have been at war with his people. He saw a beautiful woman that enticed him. He went over, he got her, and in their relationship together, ending up having a child out of wedlock, he ended up murdering the husband of that woman. David experienced the grief of what it was to lose someone in a final ending. I work as a hospice chaplain, and many times I have journeyed with people as they head toward their final ending of life. And the grief process is not set out, and we don't all go through it the same way, but there are some predictable phases that you go through when you grieve something. And you don't just grieve a person. You can grieve a dream. You can grieve a circumstance. You can grieve a hope. The first little phase that you might go through is mourning. They all start with M, the mourning phase. This is, in our culture, it's where you take 2 or 3 days. You remove yourself from daily life. You don't go to work. You don't go to care, and you're in mourning. Another phase that you may go through is when you memorialize the grief. You have a gathering. You place ashes in a box. You create a gravestone that you can go and visit the name when they were born, when they died. You create a memorial for it. And then you may explore the memories of that person or event. It could be good, could be bad, could be ugly. But then there sort of comes a point to where you have to create a new normal and you move on. Some of us today, because we've had a final ending of one sort or another, you're still in mourning. And it's lasted too long. You don't usually go by a cemetery in town, do you, and see somebody that's put up a pop-up tent and a chair, and they're still sitting there by that grave marker, do you? No, they visit it occasionally, but they don't stay there. Some of you are still in mourning, and you need to have a funeral for whatever happened. Some of you are still at the funeral, and you need to remember. Go through all those memories, work through it. But they're also the remainder of your life. So grieve those final endings. We all will have them. Out beside that point there, just put a period to remind you. You're going to have final endings. And we're going to have to grieve those final endings. On the screen, Romans 12:15 says, weep with those who weep. There's a time to weep with those who weep. Some endings are not final. They're just plain bad. It's not how we wanted it to end. Mistakes were made. Feelings were hurt. Relationships were broken. Hearts were broken. Money lost. Distance was created. Emotions out of hand. Words said that can't be taken back. Trust broken. Plans failed. Maybe bones broken. I had a bad experience, a bad ending one time on my way home from school. In high school, I was driving with a couple of friends in my little 1989 red Nissan, coming around a curve, and I'm really not sure what happened, but I went off the road, and as I tried to regroup and get back on the road, I went off, I skidded off, and I crashed into a fence. Much later, I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, and of all the people in where I lived in the county, I had a pretty bad ending to that trip. I busted up the sheriff's fence. Here's a short video of some others who had some bad endings as well. Take a look at this. You know what we do with bad endings? We learn from them, don't we? I bet all the people in those videos learned a few things. I know that I learned when I went by the sheriff's house, I better slow to learn some things. You think the people in the Bible, it's so funny to me how we sometimes say, I want a marriage, I want a family, I want to be just like the people in the Bible. Have you read about them? They're pretty rough sometimes. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 11 describes some of his bad endings. In far more labors, in far more imprisonments, beaten times without number, often in danger of death. 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. That means out in the ocean. I've been on frequent journeys in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, in the sea, amongst false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights, in hunger and in thirst, often without food. in cold and exposure. Then a little later on in Philippians, he writes on the screen, "For I have learned," circle that word, write that word down. "For I, Paul, have learned to be content in whatever circumstance I am in." We grieve final endings, and we learn from bad endings. Some of the biggest lessons I have learned in my life have been because of bad endings. Some of the biggest blessings I have received in the future have been as a result of something ending badly. Andre Crouch wrote a song, "I thank God for the mountains. I thank Him for the valleys. I thank Him for the storms He's brought me through. For if I'd never had a problem, I wouldn't know that He could solve them. I wouldn't know what faith in God, because I've learned to trust in God through it all. Through it all, I've learned to depend upon His word." So we grieve final endings. We learn from bad endings. Sometimes we have endings that are not good or bad, however. They're just sort of unexpected. And to those endings, we have to adjust. We adjust to unexpected endings. You know, Joseph in the Old Testament, he didn't expect to end up in a pit when he was out with his brothers. He didn't expect to end up in prison. He had done nothing wrong. And he certainly didn't expect to end up in the palace in charge of what all went on. And even though he didn't deserve those things, one way or the other, he learned to adjust to them along the way. Another person that I have observed in our day and time that has learned to adjust to unexpected endings is this lady here on the screen. You might recognize her. She is the monarch over in England. You know, her grandfather was the King of England, of course. Actually, it was her uncle was the King of England. And he got his sights set on a beautiful woman that he wanted to marry. However, there was just a couple of issues. She had been twice divorced. She did the throne, and the throne went to the next in line, who was his brother, Queen Elizabeth's father, who was really not all that thrilled about being king, but he was just the next in line. Queen Elizabeth really should have never been the Queen of England. But at a young age, they began to groom her and help her. And you know, her personality and her makeup really did not suit her as well as it would have suited her sister Margaret, who was a little more vivacious and outgoing and liked all of the attention of the crowd. But over time, Queen Elizabeth has adjusted to an unexpected ending in her life. And what would the world stage be? What would England be without Queen Elizabeth? The Bible says in Romans 8:28, "And we know that God works all things together for the good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose." Whatever you go through in your life, it might be final, it might be bad, it might be unexpected, but there's always the bigger perspective of the goodness of God at work in your life. The child that comes home and says, "I'm gay," there's always the bigger perspective of the goodness of God at work in your life. The promotion that you should have got but you didn't, the unexpected expense, the report from the doctor that came in that came out of the blue, there's always the bigger perspective of the goodness of God at work in your life. The mother that took good care of her body, but in the end, dementia stole her mind. The F that you made on that test, even though you studied so hard. The baby that came out of wedlock, that grandchild that you are now raising, even though you should be retired. The job that you lost, and it wasn't your fault. There's always the perspective of the goodness of God at work in your life. Look on the screen at this verse. It's very familiar. But as we go through these unexpected endings and we have to adjust to them, we learn money. Does it say your looks or your lack of them? Trust in everybody say, Lord. With all your heart and in all your ways acknowledge Him, and who's going to straighten it out? He will straighten it out. So we grieve final endings. We learn from bad endings. We have to adjust to unexpected endings. And here's where it gets better. I started with the negative on purpose so we could get better. We celebrate good endings. You know, everybody loves a good ending to a story. The fairy tales that you read, the books that are written, the Reader's Digest articles, and even the movies. Look at this. I posted this the other day on Facebook, and I got some varying responses of feedback. What has 15 actors, 4 settings, 2 writers, and 1 plot? The 632 Hallmark movies that they show every season. And they don't end bad, do they? They end good. Those stories, we like it all. We like all of life's problems resolved in about 30 minutes, don't we? We've experienced some great endings in my life over the past year. About a year ago, my wife, who's a native of Ukraine, she went through the process and became an American citizen. Now, what I learned from that process was what a bad citizen I am. There was a list of about 100 questions that you had to know the answers to, and I figured out that I probably wasn't qualified to be a citizen. But she worked at it. She's fluent in English. She passed that test, and about a year ago, she was sworn in to be an American citizen. In the next election, good, bad, or indifferent, she is going to be able to vote. Another great celebration that we had this past year was Nikolai, my son, who's 18. He graduated from high school. And you know what? I was sitting over there at Lander watching him go across the stage, and it occurred to me, why is my name not on that diploma? Why am I not walking across that stage with him? Because we're the ones that drug him out of the bed, literally, into the car some mornings. We did the projects. That was about him. That was his day, his accomplishment, and we celebrated it. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated sort of the transition of my daughter Miriam from being a little older child to more of an adolescence. And she went through and studied and got her learner's permit. That was a great celebration for her, but my prayer life has immensely increased. Romans 12:15 on the screen says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice." We grieve final endings. We learn from bad endings. We have to adjust to those unexpected endings. We celebrate the good endings. But you know what? As we turn our attention now from ending where we are to where we're going, as we look into the future, we all have a book of blank pages. We have a lot of endings that are still yet to come. As long as you have breath, you have some endings that are still yet to come. And you know what we do with those endings? We keep writing those endings. We're not always able to control every detail and every aspect, but we do over a lot. A lot of what we determine future, what our physical health is going to be like in the future, what our spiritual life is like in the future. All of you in this room today, you might look back and say, well, I've had some final endings and it's over, it's done, there's nothing I can do about it and I'm just hurting. Or I've been through some tough stuff. I've learned a lot, but it still feels bad. And I didn't expect this or that or the other, but I'm adjusting to it. And I've celebrated a lot of good things. But looking ahead, I want to encourage all of you to keep writing those unfinished endings. Take John F. Kennedy, the president, for example. It's going to show him on the screen here. There he is. Take him, for example. He had links to the mob. He was probably an addict. He was a womanizer. He cheated on his wife. And yet, we remember him as one of our most perfect presidents. Why is that? Because his wife Jackie actually wrote his legacy. She knew that his life had ended and that was final, but his legacy would continue. And somehow or another, she had the frame of mind in those days right after his death to, on the 29th of November 1963, a Life magazine journalist named Theodore White sat down to interview the newly widowed Jackie Kennedy. Inside the Kennedy family compound, she spun him a tale of beauty and horror, contrasting grisly details of her husband's murder. I could see a piece of his skull coming off. It was flesh-colored, not white. With the golden years that went before, Jack Kennedy, she recalled, had loved Broadway. He loved the Broadway musical Camelot. He had a habit of playing the title song on the Victrola at night. There will be great presidents again, she said. Listen to this. And by the way of conclusion, she added, but there will never be another Camelot. And you know how the press and the media are. They'll take one little snippet and go with it. And they did. Life magazine at that time had a circulation of 7 million, a readership of more than 30 million. The image of Camelot immediately took hold, backfilling and defining the public's sense of the Kennedy White House as a place of noble acts and youthful idealism. Historians. She helped write the script that Hollywood has followed ever since. What is it that you need to keep writing? Your story is not over. You have a lot of blank pages ahead. Keep writing them. Keep looking forward. If you've messed up in the past, decide that you're going to get it better in the future, in whatever part of life it is. In Philippians chapter 3, Paul said this, forgetting what is behind, one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead, I press on. Everybody say, I press on. Unfinished endings. Now today we've mostly talked about the temporal, where we live here and now. Miss out on talking about the eternal. Because there's one most important page yet to be written about everyone seated here today, and that is how things are going to end up in eternity. We stay so busy, we've almost gotten afraid to even mention the name of Jesus and certain things around mixed company because of the what we might get in return. But while we're here, captivated in this room today, I think we all need to look inside. How is it going to end with me on the other side? When I take my final breath here, will I wake up on the other side with Jesus? The Bible says that those who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. That's the theological term of justified. It's a one-time act, and when you say yes to Jesus, He marks it down on a paper, you're declared righteous forever. Some of you, if you stood before God today, you would be standing on your own merit. And you know how that would end up? That would be a bad ending. And serving Him, the theological word for that is sanctification. That's the process that begins once you're saved and up until you die. Are you growing? Are you learning? Are you serving? Are you loving? And then one day, for those who say yes to Jesus, we're going to be what the theological term calls glorified. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we will sing and shout the victory. But until then, my heart will go on singing. Until then, with joy, I'm going to carry on until the day mine eyes behold the city. Until the day God calls me home. When you have final endings, grieve them. When you have bad endings, learn from them. When you have unexpected endings, adjust to them. When you have good endings, celebrate them. And for all of the still unwritten unfinished endings. Keep writing.